First there were the children of the corn, then it was the summer of the savage, then came the season of the simp, and now the age of Incel. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. A sexually frustrated Virginia man blew off one of his hands while trying to make homemade explosives in a revenge attack he planned to execute on so-called hot cheerleaders. And when I take a critical examination of this latest incident of violence perpetrated by one of these incels, I see yet another incident that fits right in line with the pattern and profile I talked about in my book, The Man Crisis. And this incident where this sexually frustrated Virginia man, 23-year-old Cole Carini, was alleged to have gone off and blown off one of his hands looking to manufacture explosive devices, shows me a disturbing escalation as related to these incels and their violence. Now, these incels over the last couple of months have been participating in an escalation of violent behavior. First, we had a Canadian man who went into a massage parlor looking to murder women, and he wound up murdering one of the people who worked at that massage parlor. And then we had an individual take out a gun in an Arizona mall and participate in a mass shooting. And this is right after a couple of years ago, another one of these so-called incels went out here and bought a truck and then used it to run over people and wound up murdering several people in Canada. And over the last couple of months, we have seen an increase in the frequency of the violence perpetrated by these incels, and that's really a disturbing trend as related to an escalation in their violent behavior, because in the past, when it came down to these incels, they were usually content expressing their so-called sexual frustration online in these message boards and chats like Reddit and these forums, and it looks like they're looking to leave the forums and take their behavior up a notch. And this is something I talked about in The Man Crisis as related to the sexual deviancy of the beta male, because when the beta male is sexually angry and sexually frustrated due to his sexual miseducation, what he looks to do when he is looking to go out here and express his anger is he's looking to go out here and take things outside. And just like what I talked about in the chapter, the sexual deviancy of the beta male, what he wants to do when he does this is he's looking to use this violence to do harm to women who, and in the case of these incels, they believe they are justified in doing that harm to women because these women, they believe, have rejected them, and because they believe these women have rejected them and denied them an opportunity to graduate into manhood by having a sexual relationship with them, they believe they are justified in doing harm to these women. And this is one of the motivations that your Cole Carini had for going out here to try to manufacture bombs in his home. He wanted to go out here and do harm to what we call so-called hot cheerleaders. But when I look at his age, at 23 years old, it shows me how deeply damaged this young man is and how deeply dysfunctional this young man is, because a 23-year-old man should not be even thinking about so-called hot cheerleaders. He's graduated high school, and at the age of 23, he's at the age where he should have finished college or even finished trade school and been starting on his career. That's what a healthy man
would be focused on. Unfortunately, because these incels grew up in gynocentric environments like single mother households and had their cultural education reinforced in gynocentric environments like public schools, they believe the only way they can matriculate and graduate into manhood is if they are chosen by a woman to have sex with them, and that if they get this sexual encounter, they will be able to become the man that they were told by the mainstream media they could be. Because a lot of these incels, they grow up watching a lot of this media, which is always telling them that sex is the only way to find any sort of validation by a woman, any sort of approval by a woman. And because these men don't have the male life skills in order to attract a partner, what happens to many of these incels is they wind up simmering and boiling in their anger and their so-called sexual frustration, and because they believe they are being denied that opportunity to have that attention from women and that access to sexual partners, they believe this, again, is their justification for going out here and doing harm to women and anybody else who disagrees with their position. And these incels bought into this ideology because they heard about Elliot Rodger, the 22-year-old killer in the La Isla Vista massacre, and they have taken on his ideologies that were written in his manifesto as some sort of religious belief. Unfortunately, what many of these males don't understand is that Elliot Rodger was a deeply troubled individual, and Elliot Rodger's ideology was one that was fundamentally flawed, because your Elliot Rodger was a very lazy male, and he did not want to put in the effort in himself. He thought everything was about the woman, and what he really wanted to do was use a woman to be an attachment to him in order to elevate his social status, because he had very low self-esteem and poor self-confidence. And because he had low self-esteem and poor self-confidence, he wanted to use a woman on his arm as this attachment that would elevate his social status and get him the attention of far more popular males. So your Elliot Rodger, he wanted to have a sexual relationship with a woman for the wrong reason, and this incel wanted to have the same thing as well. Many of these incels, they want to have sex for the wrong reasons, and they want to hurt women because these women, they believe, are denying them an opportunity to have a relationship with them. But again, many of these incels lack the male life skills and the male social skills, and they also lack masculine energy. And they don't, what's the really sad thing about your incels is they don't want to put the work into improving themselves. No, a lot of these males, what they want to do is sit on these message boards all day long and talk about things like 80-20 rules and how the top 20% of guys get 80% of the women, instead of trying to work on themselves and build themselves up. And that's what men do, because a man is not really focused on the attention or the approval of women. Only beta males who are caught up in gynocentrism focus so much on the woman. Most males who have a healthy perspective, they are focused on building themselves up and improving themselves. And when they do this, they radiate positive masculine energy, and that's what attracts other women to them. And this is something that your incel does not understand. They sit there radiating feminine energy like Elliot Rodger used to do when he was alive, because when I watched Elliot Rodger's videos, he was basically just like another woman. I mean, he basically was extremely feminine, and that's something the incels don't understand, is that their patron saint radiated feminine energy. He really did not make any sort of effort, and he sat there stewing in his anger writing all of these manifestos just like this young man did, instead of putting effort into himself. And what I'm seeing now is more of a disturbing trend as related to these incels. And this is something law enforcement needs to take very seriously, because with these incels escalating their behavior, it shows me that we're going to be in a very disturbing trend as related to their behavior, because we've just had, this is the third incident in less than a month as related to these incels and participating in their violence. And again, this man was planning to use homemade explosives to do harm and participate in an act of domestic terrorism, all because he couldn't get the attention of so-called hot cheerleaders. And that's really scary when you really think about it. Here we have a 23-year-old man who is so focused on attention of women that he's not thinking about building himself up, and instead all he thinks about is doing harm to so-called hot cheerleaders, even though it has been at least about 4 or 5 years since he has graduated high school and should have graduated college. This guy is not thinking about moving himself forward. He is stagnant, sitting there looking to get revenge on imaginary women who have allegedly rejected him as a so-called sexual partner. So that's a very, very scary trend as related to these incels. Again, they are leaving their Reddit message boards or their online forums, and many of them are now starting to making plans to go outside. And we all need to start taking this much more seriously than it is, because with these incels looking to escalate their behavior into violence, it shows me that this man crisis is getting worse in this country, because we're having an increase in the frequency of the violence these men are participating in, and we're seeing, again, more and more of these incels looking to do harm to others and looking to do harm to their communities. So when I look at these incels, I really, again, see something really dangerous going on here, and people can't really take it for granted, because thank God he only injured himself, because had he taken this bomb somewhere, he could have cost a lot of people their lives, and people could have lost their lives all because this male just didn't get the male life skills, male survival skills, or social skills he needed in order to navigate the world. And that's the big problem with the incels that I have seen on my comment section. Many of these males, they don't want to take any sort of accountability, they don't want to take any sort of responsibility, and they don't want to take any sort of ownership. Everything is always somebody else's fault. Everything is always the girls out here with the Stacys, with the Chads, and the Tyrones, but never is anything about them and them taking the ownership over themselves or taking ownership of their lives, because no one is a involuntary celibate. Celibacy is something that men do voluntary as a choice. No, that's what these incels don't understand. A man voluntarily chooses not to get involved with a woman sexually, and women choose whatever partners they gravitate to based on the energy a man radiates. And what the incel, again, does not understand is that your patron saint, Elliot Rodger, radiated feminine energy, and a lot of these guys also radiate feminine energy, and that repulses women. And what further repulses women are their socially awkward behavior and their poor social skills, which many of these males refuse to put any effort into working on. Many of these incels, they sit there talking about how bad the women are, but never want to take a minute to reflect on themselves and do any sort of self-examination. And they believe, okay, it's always somebody else's fault. But at the end of the day, if you want something in this life, you've got to put the work in towards achieving it. You've got to put the work in towards accomplishing it. And the smart man is not looking to look for the attention and approval of women. He is looking to build himself up because he knows once he builds himself up, he will become the kind of man that attracts all sorts of positive people to him. And if God wants things to work out, he will send the right woman to him, and you will have a relationship that is about you and that woman, and not about trying to elevate yourself to some high social status that is imagined in your mind and some covert contract that you want to have with this woman, and instead of having a healthy relationship overall. So your incel is a very deeply disturbed and deeply damaged individual, and sadly, these people, they're looking out to destroy other people's lives, and they don't understand that destroying other people's lives isn't going to help you in any way, shape, or form deal with whatever sexual issues you have. A lot of these men really need a sexual re-education because the sexual miseducation they received from their single mothers and some of their beta male fathers and the stuff they imbibed in mainstream media has twisted their minds and twisted their perceptions about relationships and sex. If you want to learn more about the dysfunctional behavior of incels and what drives them to participate and plan acts of violence, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle formats. You can also find The Man Crisis on Smashwords and the iBookstore, and it is a book that will help you understand the dysfunctional behavior of incels and the disturbing behaviors that many of these males participate in and what motivates them to participate in this violence. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.